As we compare uPAR, so uPAR and PAR do exactly the same thing. They will compare a student's grade level comprehension when text is read aloud to them to what their grade level comprehension is when they read it independently. And will tell you how many grades can we increase a student's comprehension by reading text to the student. Is that 1 grade increase, 2 grades increase, 5 grades increase, no increase? We will have data. The two most common read aloud accommodations or reading accommodations are number one, read aloud, and number two, extended time. We will have data to back both of those decisions. So while PAR and uPAR do exactly the same thing, the difference is how do they do it? With PAR, it is administered one-on-one, one teacher, one student. The teacher is the read aloud. They are setting up the computer for the text to speech. They are doing all of the scoring. And with technology, we can do group administration. So I have data on 25 students or 250 students in the same amount of time that I have it with one student. So it really comes down to who are we really looking at? If we're just looking for a single student, you should be using the paper version because it's free. But if I got to pick the choice of who really is quote unquote the buyer for uPAR, I love this as part of the MTSS process because our expectation for every student is that they access grade level content. We already have assessments that tell us and identify students who are not meeting this. uPAR is awesome at looking not just at those tier 3, but also tier 1 and 2 students to say, hey, these students could get to grade level comprehension if text were being read aloud. So if I were a building principal, I don't know a building principal who wouldn't want to know that. Next slide. So these are screenshots that look at uPAR. So these are coming directly from startpar.com, which is the student version of uPAR. So student logs in using their school ID, either Google or Microsoft. And we ask the student to go ahead and start by putting in their grade level. In the past, we used to ask teachers to do this, but what we were finding is it was difficult to, anytime we asked teachers to take additional time to provide more information, that's a barrier to implementation. And we were finding that almost in 50% of the administrations of uPAR, the grade level performance of the student didn't match what we had put in as the student's independent reading level. So we have made that change now to where the student is just, let's start with your grade level at this point. So here we're going to, again, because we're talking about technology, so we're going to make sure if we are doing group administration, earbuds or headphones are almost a necessity at that point in time. Are you hearing this? Is the speed correct? So on and so forth. And we want to provide feedback because we expect students to eventually struggle with text. Now, that might be right away. It might be several passages in, but eventually students are going to struggle. And we want to give them a progress. How are they doing? Because even if you're running a marathon, you see that finish line, you can always give a little bit more to push through to the end. Initially, when the student puts in their grade level, this list of passages, these are all at the student's grade level. So if their student is a fourth grader, using Kathy's example, these would all be fourth grade passages. We do try to keep the titles kind of innocuous because we don't want students to guess the content and use their background knowledge to answer the questions. We're really trying to measure their auditory listening comprehension at that point. If students cannot read the passage, they can click on the little speaker icon to the left of the radio button and have that passage read to them, so they don't necessarily have to have that great word ID skill right here at the beginning. Here, the student is going to see that passage and they can adjust the passage. Coming soon, you're going to actually be able to change your highlight color. So you're going to start to do some visual color strategies, and you'll also be able to change your text to speech engine. Here, initially, all we have is the ability to slow it down, speed it up. to meet an individual student's needs. They can go back and have the passage read as many times as they would like, but once they're finished, they would hit the next button
Yeah,
and
before I
yep, go
flip the
ahead.
page, Dave, this I think is something that people often forget about. We have so many students who have auditory processing disorders that if I can just slow it down, they do so much better. So even again, it's not only the accommodation that's read aloud, but it's read aloud no with highlighting of text. And I've also added that I can slow the text down. So again,
Sure.
when you're talking about AT accommodations, remember there are multiple parts to this.
Right. And that's what we feel is really important is that bimodal reading support. So not only the spoken word, but also the highlighted word. Because how many of your students with disabilities can manually visually process while auditorily comprehending text as it's read? I will submit to you that that is probably not a student with a disability at that point. But when we think about our textbooks, textbooks have come a long way in the online versions and electronic. Very often they will have an auditory version. That's absolutely fantastic. What is it missing? It's missing the highlighting. So, how many of your students can manually visually process as that text is being read? That's a pretty difficult process. Here in our comprehension, so once the student has the passage read to them, they are given a list of comprehension questions. As Kathy showed, we're going to have different types of questions. So you might have a main idea, you might have fact and recall, you might have inferential type questions. And the student can go back and look for the answer in the context of the passage. If they do have that study strategy skill, fantastic, they can utilize it. Again, if the student cannot read the question or the answers, they can have those read to them. And once the student finishes answering all of the comprehension questions, the next thing that they're going to see, if you'll flip the slide, Kathy, is going to be based upon the student. So I can have two fourth graders sitting right next to one another. And after that first page, what they see on the screen may look entirely different. If the student does well, they're having the grade level content read to them and they can answer with at least 75% accuracy, we will increase the complexity of the text. And we will continue to increase until we get to either 12th grade and we run out of text, or we actually find a grade level that the students cannot comprehend. Students will never be given more than 5 passages in uPAR before we give them the opportunity to opt out of the process. And we're always going to give them feedback. So if you want to go ahead and flip that page, Kathy, we're going to give them feedback and let them know how you're doing. We want to, again, we expect students to get to eventually grade level passages and above or even below that they're going to struggle with. So we want to continue to give them that feedback at that point. If the student does not do well on that first initial passage, we will decrease the text complexity. So we'll drop down a grade and we will continue to drop down until we can find a grade level that the student can comprehend. And we will always give them at least one passage, only one passage that is either going to be at their grade level or at whatever grade they comprehended text being read to them, and we're going to ask the student to read that passage silently and test their silent reading comprehension because we need to have an apples to apples comparison in order to provide you data. So let's take a look at what the data looks like. This is a summary circle. So here I have well over 1,000 students in my data, and these are all of our possible outcomes. Over on the side, that's your key, if you will. So this tells us that any of the students that are in purple, those 705 students, they are students who independently read at grade level already. But when text is read to them, they can comprehend above grade level. So these are students that benefit, but they don't have to have a read aloud support. They're already independently reading at grade level. So this is one of those could be beneficial, but is not necessary. When we talk about our necessary students, those are going to be students in the green, the blue, and the orange. The green are students who do not read independently to grade level, but can comprehend text above grade level. So, in Kathy's example of the fourth grader, that student would be at least fifth grade comprehension when text is read to them or higher. Blue, the student comprehends to grade level when text is read to them. So in Kathy's fourth grader, we got them to fourth grade. We got them to grade level comprehension. But when we increase the complexity to fifth grade, they did not score 75%. So they cannot be green. They would be blue. But that's still utopia. Green and blue are really the scores that we're looking for because these are below grade level readers independently, but we can get them to grade level comprehension. Think about students who are going through intervention. Oftentimes, they are getting pulled out, going to intervention class or reading recovery class, and their ability appropriately matched to content. And then when they're done with that, what do? We send them back to the gen ed classroom, and the content is here, and their ability level is here. What uPAR does is it measures, can we close this gap? Can we either shrink or close this gap using text to speech? That is what uPAR does. Our orange students are students who do not independently read to grade level, but when text is read to them, they can comprehend at least one grade level above their independent reading level. So in Kathy's fourth grade example, if they were in the orange circle, maybe we got them to third grade. And that was when they got the passing score, or second grade, but they independently read at first grade level. So if we take that fourth grader and they don't score 75%, we drop the text down to third grade or to third grade. Let's say they don't get it again, they don't get 75%, we drop it down to second grade. Then all of a sudden they do get 75%. We'll give them a second grade passage. They do not score 75% when it's read independently. Our accommodated comprehension is better than our independent, and they would be in orange. We shrink the gap, but we do not close it. And then
But
our
again,
last, yep,
oh, sorry. But again, as an educator, think about that. That's such great information for us because then we know we have to front load these kids with vocabulary. We need to maybe scaffold that vocabulary or scaffold that text to bring it to where they can understand it because we still got to get that content to that student. So it's still giving you great information. And then again, we can look at our IEP and say, are we making the right accommodations?
yep, absolutely. And my kids that I actually like to start with are our kids in red because a read aloud accommodation is a pretty heavy duty reading accommodation. But we didn't, for those students that are in red, we did not move their comprehension even one grade level by reading text to them. So they're below grade level readers and we don't improve their comprehension. Now we got to start asking ourselves, what else can we do for these students to try to help them access grade level text? So I really think the red are almost the most important kiddos to start with, but the blue, green, and then orange are really the colors that we're really looking for in our summary circle. Can we have the next slide, Kathy? And here's what's important when we start talking about uPAR, because when we think about uPAR, what uPAR is doing, it is measuring what does text to speech do to that student's comprehension. Text to speech is really great over on that far right-hand category in word identification. If you have a student who struggles with decoding and word identification, text to speech is an awesome tool. Think about your kids who are dyslexic. But what if their struggle is not decoding? What if what if their English is not their native language? Or what if they struggle with background knowledge? I'm a huge baseball fan. And when we are talking about words like hit and run and sacrifice, those words mean something completely different when we're talking about baseball than their most common occurrence in English literature at that point. And you've just got to have that background knowledge at that point. Or what if our students are really still struggling with our print processing, left to right, top to bottom, matching prosody, things of that nature. So text to speech is not a great solution for our language and print processing students, but boy, it makes a world of difference for our students who are really struggling with identifying words on the page. So let's go
Hey,
ahead and
Dave,
look. Yeah, go ahead.
we got a couple of questions,
Yep.
and just to make sure that I'm answering them correctly, one of the questions, can it be administered in a Chromebook? And it is in all environments, correct?
Yep. Yep. It's all entirely web-based. So you could do it on a cell phone, Chromebook, computer, iPad. As long as it can reach the internet, you're good to go.
And the other question is, could this be available on a communication device so the student could have access themselves? And again, if you can get to the Windows, yes. But
Yes.
here's another example. I had a student with significant autism who was nonverbal, and he did have a communication device, and everybody's like, he's not reading. And a lot of us know that our kids with autism can be very hyperlexic, right? They're
Mhm.
like, they've got it. And I really had a feeling he knew what we were doing. So sometimes that's why you might want to go back again to the paper version. Is I gave him the paper version. I just printed it out on a piece of paper and I handed it to him. I said, read it. In fact, I think I just said read and didn't even look at him. And when he was done, he handed it back. Then I took the questions and I just tore them apart and I gave him one question at a time because I didn't want to overload him. And I said, read it. And he handed it back. And then I gave him three choices, and they were like on A, B, C, D, whatever the cards were, or four choices. I didn't change the protocol at all. And then he just handed me back the answer. So there are ways to kind of look at that. And Dave just talked about students with who come to us from other countries who may be very verbally literate in their whatever language they have, but they cannot decode their own language also. So if they're from Mexico or whatever, they may be able to understand Spanish, but if it's in print, they still can't decode. So you can kind of play around with that, which I've done in the past. I've also we had a vision person who did it to see if there was a difference between this, if the student did better with large print or braille, because they were beginning
Mhm.
to make that change. So you can kind of play around with this a little bit with the paper version. If that
Yep.
didn't answer your
Absolutely.
questions, throw them back in the chat.
Yep. So this is an example of what like an individual student might be. So you can see this student is a sixth grader. You see the little icon at grade 6 there. The first passage would have been grade level with a read aloud support. You can see they scored 100%. So we increased the text complexity, increased it again. And then finally, when we got to 10th grade, now the student couldn't score 75%. We went back to grade level and tested their independent reading level. This student already reads at grade level. So this student would show up in the purple at that point in time, meaning that they already independently read at grade level, but when text is read to them, they can actually comprehend above grade level. Let's compare this to another student, again, a sixth grader. But when they were given grade level text, they didn't do really well. So we decreased down to fifth grade, decreased the text complexity again. All the way down to third grade, we were able to get a score above 75% at third grade. We compared that to third grade independent reading. The student did equally as well reading text aloud. So this student would be in red, meaning that we did not move them even one grade above their independent reading level. However, there is data on this page that makes me question the use of a read aloud support, and that's the time that's above. You can see when the student took grade 3 when they were accommodated, we actually completed the task in just over 3 minutes. But when we asked the student to do grade 3 independent, it took them over 10 minutes. So this student could possibly benefit from a time savings, not necessarily a grade level um, increase at this point in time. So this is one of these to be determined. I would probably still recommend introducing a text reader right away with the student, and then I would come back and re-administer uPAR in a relatively quick period of time, probably 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, again, remember
Um,
what I talked about was gas in the tank. If
yep,
it takes this kid 10 minutes to read this, and classrooms go pretty fast,
yep,
they're done.
absolutely. Yep. Here's the student, sixth grade, did not do really well. We went to fifth grade again, didn't do very well. Then we got to fourth grade. We actually got that passing score. When we compared that to fourth grade silent or independent read, he actually could not do it. So this student would be in orange, meaning that he can comprehend with text read to him better than reading independently, but he does not get to grade level. Here's a student who's the sixth grade. They were able to score very well. We increased the text complexity, didn't do very well. Compared that to grade level silent reading, did not score 75%. So this student is in the blue, meaning they got to grade level, but could not comprehend above grade level. But again, this is what we're looking for. This is the data that we're really looking for to try to get students to grade level comprehension. Our last possible outcome, here's a student who's again a sixth grader. These are all sixth graders. This student got all the way up to ninth grade. We went back to sixth grade, gave them an independent read. So we asked them to read that to themselves independently, did not do well. And this student was again given the option. Remember, we said no more than 5 passages. The silent read was their fifth passage. We said, hey, you can comprehend ninth grade text. Do you want to try 10th grade? And the student said, nope, I'm done. And they're out. But this student would appear in green, meaning that they can comprehend above grade level when text is read to them, when they cannot read at grade level, when they have to read silently at that point. So these are all really great examples and possible student outcomes. I think the next screen was our purple student, and that just shows that we actually picked up where so we did a recheck. So we picked up where the student started to struggle, which was 10th grade, and now months later, they're able to comprehend all the way up and through 12th grade at that point in time. So again, I don't know that I would have necessarily re-administered to the student because they're so far above grade level already. I don't think it's really important, but a couple of these students I probably would want to come back in a relatively short period of time and want to re-administer uPAR.
And I've done that, Dave, with students when they've got an IEP that's coming up. I'm going to give them a recheck because I want to know, am I still giving the right accommodations? And the
Sure.
cool thing too about doing this is you can actually see the growth, and the kid can see the growth
Yep.
because now I'm seeing it, I'm hearing it, I got more gas in the tank, I'm able to do things better. I can sit and listen better because I'm not having to struggle as much, and my time on task is better spent. So you can really see some great growth in kids. And especially, when you have them, I used to pick up kids as kindergartners and still have them when they're in 12th grade. So when you can see the years and the progress and stuff, it's amazing the results that you can get. And you can close that gap just
Yep.
by giving them the right accommodations.
Yep. Yep. I wanted to share this slide. This actually comes from the state of Arkansas. In the state of Arkansas, they are just finishing up year 2, where every student has access to uPAR and a text reader. They're actually using Read and Write as their text reader. But this is talking about their NAEP scores, and we're actually closing the gap for our students, both our students in special education as well as our students in general education. So we've all heard how bad the NAEP scores were, but Arkansas is actually bucking the trend and they are actually closing that gap for both their special ed and gen ed population um, when we add assistive technology to the mix. And that's a pretty powerful tool.